The bells of Baelor's September tolled through the dusk like slow iron hearts, and the sound carried down every alley and over every roof tile until the city seemed to pulse with it. Their weight pressed upon the hive of streets, tightened the stinks and murmurs into a single breath held beneath a cloudy sky that glowed with the last pale thread of the day. In the High Septon's hand lay a scrap of parchment with an iron crown inked by a stiff and unlovely hand. It smelled of old lamp oil and salt where the raven's feet had fouled it. He had read it too many times already. He sat alone with candles guttering, their smoke climbing blue and thin to lose itself in the darkness above the 7 altars. Marble faces peered through the haze, the father's brows stern as the edge of a coin, the mother's lips gentle and grave, the warrior's mouth caught at a fierce beginning, the maiden proud and wary, the smith bent with patience, the crone's eyes full of a light that never lit the floor, and the stranger shrouded as ever. The letter was heavy in its paltry weight, as if every word were a bead of lead. He did not pray yet. It was the task of the hour to choose how to pray later, to choose which words would be placed before a court of gods and men. The parchment named names and claimed claimants. It spoke of a throne that had never been meant for the boy in crimson and gold. It fastened on hair and lineage with a scholar's chill. There had been such letters in elder days, but seldom had one been cast into this city when all was tinder and no one knew who held the spark. A rasp of soft leather on stone announced the first intruder. The man who emerged into candlelight moved with careful humility, his perfumed sleeves quiet as moth wings. He bowed deeply, almost comically, if the moment had been less dire. "I find your holiness at prayer," came the soft voice. "At study." The High Septon's own voice was grainy with weariness and a lifetime of calling sinners to their knees. He watched the eunuch rise and smile. "It is a bad night to be out, Lord Varys. The city tastes of storms. The city tastes of fear, which is our daily stew," Varys replied, gliding nearer. He did not look toward the altars. "I bring you a thing you will not want and must have. The letter." The High Septon lifted the parchment just enough to show he was not to be made a fool of. "I have it in hand. There are more." Varys let the words fall without drama. "Ravens fly with candles at midnight. Lads with long faces carry copies through inns. Men read in cellars and whisper upon walks by the river. It is a clever letter because it is dry. Dry things catch fire fastest when rubbed. And which of the 7 do you counsel I call upon, Lord Varys? The smith, to fashion a hammer large enough to pound out this slander? The father, to weigh our queen in his scales?" Varys drifted to one of the carved pillars, fingers resting on stone. "I counsel you to remember that kings are anointed with oils you keep. Without your hand and your oils, a crown is a cap and a sword is a bauble. They will beg your blessing, unless you give it too cheaply. Crown and blood are not bargains to my hand." He pushed himself slowly to standing. Fatness had always been his sin, and his staff was the only thing that forgave him it. "If I believe the boy is not King Robert's, my refusal becomes a battle horn. If I bless him and he is false, I stain us all." Varys smiled sadly. "It is not given to men to choose cleanly. Robert is dead. Lord Eddard Stark is in the black cells. Lord Renly counts friends. Lord Stannis counts laws. Lord Tywin counts swords. The boy's mother counts only herself." He held up his hands as if to show they were empty. "You alone may count the gods." The High Septon closed his eyes. Bells tolled again and the sound got into his bones. When he opened them, he saw Varys already watching his face for decisions. It irked him that he was so read by a creature who had never taken bread in his chapel. "I will summon her," he said at last. "Not to answer to me, no, let it not be said I presume, but to present herself to the 7. A holy inquest. We shall hear witnesses under the glass gaze of the Father, and if she will not submit to that, then we shall anoint no brows until she does." Varys inclined his head. "This is wisdom." "No," the High Septon said. "This is fear in a decent robe. Bring me what names must be heard. Bring me those who saw Lord Jon Arryn's last days and those who keep the city's bastards as though they were secrets in jars." Bring me the goldsmith who bound the book of lineages that Lord Stark consulted. Bring me Lord Barristan Selmy. Bring me the prince's sworn shield. The hound. Varys's brows arched. He is no lover of prayer. Then he shall stand at the doors and keep swords from rushing the mother's isle. Even wolves know where they cannot feed. He looked at the parchment again. And bring me Lord Stark. Varys hesitated. He is indisposed. He can be lifted in a chair if his leg is broken, the High Septon said, and the old stones of Baelor September seemed to echo his resolve. I will not weigh a queen without hearing the man who warned the realm. I will say the words publicly, with the city watching, and either she will come, or I will close these doors and snuff the oils. Varys bowed again, hands folded. As you say, but move swiftly, your holiness. The day is a rotting fruit. If you squeeze too late, all you will find is flies. The summons went out at dawn. Crisp words brushed in a novice's painstaking hand, and they were carried by tallow-faced acolytes into the steaming city. No horse shook ahead for them, no trumpet sounded. Still, by noon, the edict was read in the Street of the Sisters and in the tanners' wards by the river and within the Red Keep. The text was simple. A holy inquest would be convened in the great September of Baelor on the morrow under the eyes of the Seven and the gaze of L citizens, to examine grave rumors touching upon the sanctity of the Queen's marriage bed and the legitimacy of the royal issue. Until the inquest concluded, the rites of anointing and coronation would be withheld. Cersei Lannister had never mastered the art of stillness when rage took her. She had learned the art of seeming still. When the vellum was placed upon the table between the goblet and the ewer, she did not fling wine on the bearer. She read it twice. She held it out toward Pycelle. The old man held it too near his eyes and pretended to puzzle at the letters. They dare, she said. It was all she permitted her voice. The rage moved beneath the surface of her skin like steam seeking a vent. We must presume some confusion, Pycelle murmured. The High Septon is a pious man. Pious men are sometimes stirred to excessive care. He will wish to look under my skirts while the whole city peeps about his ankles. She turned to the window slit that let heat and light in and meaning out. The courtyard below was full of men in red and gold and some in dull yellow. The gold cloaks lounged in clumps, idly practicing thrusts against straw men, laughing with their mouths shut. Every movement looked slovenly to her. Where is Lord Renly? Your Grace, the title tasted sweet today. The Lord of Storm's End is with his knights, Varys said from the doorway, as if he had been there all along. His hands were folded and his crown of scented powder did not shift. I am told he is measuring horseflesh with Lord Ser Loras, which is to say they are counting reins. She did not look at him. You will burn that parchment and then forget you ever saw it. I cannot burn the bells, Your Grace. His voice slid across the room and settled in corners. They will ring tomorrow, and the people will come with their children raised to see. If you keep your door shut, the Seven will look out upon an empty chair. No one will be anointed afterwards with a clean conscience. And consciences, alas, are as contagious as laughter. Should she have had him killed years ago? That thought came when she looked at Varys too long. I do not need the Seven's oils to crown my son, she said. We will crown him with the sword, if need be, and let the High Septon weep into his sleeve. There is no crown that sits well when it galls the scalp, Littlefinger said lazily from a stool he had already appropriated. He had not been invited and he never noticed. Your Grace could turn this to triumph, rather. Appear robed in chastity, in white and gold. Kiss the mother's feet. Let the city see you brave. It is ugly to refuse an old man his question. It is beautiful to answer it and make him seem a dotard for asking. She cast him a look like a thrown bee. And if he asks me a question no wise queen should answer? Then you demand a trial by combat, Littlefinger replied, his eyes going merry. It is an old right. You need not even be present while your champion does your answering. You have 7 fine white swords to choose among. She thought of Jaime as one thinks of a pillow the morning after a night of bad dreams. Empty comfort, rumpled and absent. I have 6, she said. The one who mattered is upon a road that does not return fast enough. Ser Mandon at your right hand looks quite capable of lancing a rumor, Peter said. Ser Marin is a bludgeon, to be sure, but a bludgeon often works where grace might slip. And then, the hound. The hound, she said, tasting the word. The hound's burnt face came to mind, the way he watched her son, as if measuring where to stand to catch him should he fall. He is sworn to Joffrey. He is sworn to whoever holds the prince's leash, Littlefinger replied with cheerful insolence. And he has a healthy contempt for Septons. I suspect he would be glad to erase doubt with a blade. Pycelle coughed and delivered a tangle of beard to his chest. There is a question of whether the High Septon may convene such an inquest without your leave. He can anoint without my leave, she said, and he can refuse without it. He can refuse all the lords and make us crown kings with dirt and spit if it pleases him to say that the oils are unclean. He has the people when he has bells. He has the people when he lifts bread. He has the people when we need them to cheer. This is a blade he holds by the hilt. Varys said nothing. Littlefinger's mouth twitched as if from some inner jest. Cersei looked back to the parchment and saw between the lines Tywin Lannister's face, not yet present, and Jaime's face, not yet present, and every man who should have been in this room and was not. She saw the city beyond the keep, too many mouths and the wrong knives in the wrong hands. She saw her son's brow unadorned by oil. In that ghostly crown, 1,000 jeering faces glinted. Very well, she said. We will give the old hypocrite his show. He shall ask his sugared questions and receive my answers, and then he shall pour his oils as he was born to do. But if he presses me, I will ask for combat, and the hound will answer. Send for him. They sent for Sandor Clegane, and he came with a slouch, as if the stones of the keep were straw to him. He smelled faintly of horse and lantern grease. Cersei saw his dark eyes flick over the others like knives. His burns were a map she could not help but follow. You'll fight for me if I ask it, she said. You'll settle a priest's game and make the realm quiet. I don't fight for games, he said, voice rough as a street cart wheel. I fight because coin is thrown at me or because some fool stands where I need to go. I don't fight for gods or women who pretend at gods. She stepped close and let him see her eyes. Let him see what the Seven's altars would not. You fight for the boy whose life is a wall between your flesh and a fire that never goes out, she said softly. You fight for the prince who gives you what your brother never gave you. Use. If you do not, I will find a man who will, and he will stand closer to the throne than you will ever again. Sandor's smile was not a smile. I fight for the boy. If the boy asks, he said at last, have the little prince lay it on me himself. Say, hound, I command it. Then I'll fight whoever you like. She dismissed him with a flick of fingers that felt like they had been dipped in stinging nettles. Joffrey would say anything she coached him to say. She was his mother and his queen. He was her son and a blade with no sheath. The morrow dawned red at the edges, a bloody fruit sliced by cloud, and all of King's Landing gathered, as if their lives were a fire that had been banked and this day was a prod that woke sparks. There were bakers who forgot their bread and bargemen who left their poles in the reeds so they could climb the great hill to Baelor's September mothers hoisted infants to see the gleam. Fathers grabbed little wrists and dragged them lest they be lost in the press, and the beggars even washed in the horse troughs to be holy for an hour. The 7 towers of Baelor's rose like candles, each with a point of brightness, and the wide steps were scrubbed until the stone seemed new. On the huge carved doors, feverish bees of carving swarmed, a sea of tiny faces and wings and folded hands, so that when the doors swung they seemed to breathe. Sansa Stark had known the Sept as a place of cool marble and gentle light, where fat old women murmured and little girls daydreamed. Today it was all noise. Even the hush was loud. She smoothed her blue-gray gown and tried to look as the queen had taught her, like a lily set into a golden brooch. Septa Mordain had died and Sansa had learned to pray without a voice telling her how. She thought of her father in a dark place and of rumors that were like nettles, pricking and prickling. She thought of Joffrey's hair, bright as a coin at festival, and of the way the sunlight loved it. She tried not to think of the bruise on her arm where he had grasped her too hard the day before. The queen was white and gold, as Littlefinger had suggested, and even her anger made a kind of radiance in that light. Her hair was coiled with pearls. Joffrey at her side wore crimson that drank light as oil does on water. He had his chin lifted and his mouth was a line that no older man could have made so pursed. Tommen peered around Ser Boros Blunt with the awe of a child in a hall full of drums. Myrcella held herself very straight. Sansa loved her for that small courage. The High Septon sat between the statues of the father and the mother. Godlight from the rose window in the father's tower made his face a puzzle of color. There were no chairs for the common folk. There were gallery seats for lords and stepped benches for petty knights, and there were all the spaces between, filled with bodies like a web without a seam. The King's Guard stood like tooth-white pillars. Barristan Selmy's armor did not glint so much as glow with an old polish. Ser Meryn Trant looked like a man who had swallowed a chair back and could not dislodge it. Ser Mandon's eyes were stones washed smooth by a dark river. Renly Baratheon was present with a bright green mantle that might have been a joke or a challenge. At his shoulder stood Ser Loras Tyrell in silver and blue, newer looking than any man had a right to be. He glanced once at Sansa and gave the sort of smile that makes young girls ache. Varys, near the front, looked as if he had been carved from soft cheese and set there to observe. Littlefinger lounged where he could see every face at once. Lord Pycelle had been lowered into a bench like a sack that would leak if set wrong. The High Septon lifted his hands and the noise fell to a reverent tremble. He spoke first of the city, of the death of a king, of the need for peace, of the place of the faith as healer and witness, and then he said that rumors were wolves and must be faced with torches. He had in his hand a book of lineages. He had in his other hand the copy of the letter with the Iron Crown. The crimson on Cersei's mouth deepened by some trick of light. "Will our good sister Cersei Lannister, Queen Dowager and Regent to our dear Prince Joffrey, stand under the gaze of the father?" he asked, and 1,000 throats hummed with curious hunger. She stood with no tremor. She stood as if the altars were chairs for tired men, and she was made of ivory and will. If she had been painted by a master, her expression would have been titled Contempt in gold. "I will answer no slanders," she said, not quite loud enough to carry to the walls. But in such a high place, the smallest word seems to walk on air. "There is no slander when truth is sought," the High Septon replied evenly. "We will not make a judgment this day, we will gather truth. If slander comes, the seven will hear it and make ashes of it with their breath." A novice read out names. The first witnesses were dull. A scribe of the most devout who testified to the laws of anointing and the sanctity thereof. A cobbler who had heard drunks in the street of Silk say that the former hand had pored over parchments. An ancient Septon who recited some bookish memory of how in the days of Maegor the cruel queens were questioned. He spoke too long and the Sept began to murmur with heat and boredom. Then they brought in the big man with the boy's face and black hair. He had clean hands and a smith's shoulders, and a stunned fox's gaze. He wore a good tunic, and his clumsy bow was to the mother because a novice whispered to him which was which. Sansa recognized him vaguely as the boy she had seen in the Street of Steel once, watching the tourney armor with the reverence of a child watching a play. "Tobo Mott's apprentice," the novice cried. "He says his name is Gendry." Mott himself limped behind with a scowl for everyone. Varys did not look satisfied or dissatisfied. He looked pleased to have been right, which might be the same thing. Gee, the questions were simple ones that the highborn chuckled at. Who was his mother? What did he know of his father? What hair did he see upon his head in the glass? The boy did not know. His mother had died. His father had been a man who came and went. He had been told many tales. He answered with good sense and gruffness that did him credit. "Come nearer," the High Septon said. Gendry came and stood under the father's massive chin. The light fell upon him in such a way that the black of his hair drank the colors, and the city drew in breath. Cersei's mouth curved. "We are to be tried by bastards now? By facts," the High Septon said without heat. "We have other witnesses." They brought, then, a woman from Chataya's with a child upon her hip. The baby had hair like a raven's wing, and when it wailed, Half the women present put hands to their breasts. The woman spoke of a good king who had never struck her and had always laughed and had liked to hold his daughter. She did not name him because the High Septon would not let her. She told no secrets, really. Secrets had been stripped already when men brought a child into the temple. Sansa saw Joffrey's knuckles whiten where he gripped the rail before him. She saw the queen's lashes lower like a curtain being drawn. She felt heat rise under her own skin and looked away, up at the crystal crowns and mosaics to keep her face steady. When the murmuring had climbed again into the rafters and hung there like a haze, the High Septon raised a hand. "Let Lord Eddard Stark be brought," he said. The hush that fell then felt like the moon lying down upon the crowd. Even the bells stuttered and stopped in some tower, and the air tasted of candle wax. From a side door, carried in a chair like an invalid lord, came the hand of the king, or the man who had been hanged 2 deaths ago, and his face was pale in a way that made Sansa's heart turn over. She did not cry out. She did not cry. She held herself by her fingernails. Ser Barristan himself walked beside the chair. Varys walked on the other side. 2 jailers held the poles. Ned Stark's leg was straight and stiff, bound in splints. The beard that had been brown and iron now had shock-whitened streaks. He saw Sansa and dipped his head, so slightly that only a daughter would know it had been meant for her. He swore to tell truth upon the 7 before their faces. He did so in a voice unembellished, as if he were reciting what he had spent a winter learning by heart. He spoke of Jon Arryn, of visits to the Street of Steel and the Street of Silk, of a book of lineages that had said a stubborn thing, that all trueborn Baratheons had, for generation upon generation, been dark-haired. He spoke of boys and girls with the late king's eyes alive in them, born in brothels and kitchens and behind brown shutters. He spoke of a queen who loved her brother too well and of the danger to the realm. He did not preen upon his own foresight. He did not speak of who must be king. When he finished, he put his hands together and lowered his eyes as if he were ashamed to have used so many words in a holy place. Cersei's laughter had no laughter in it. "We are to accept this from a traitor who schemed to put a sullen exile upon my son's throne," she said. "He confesses to taking counsel with Lord Stannis, who has sent his ravens like crows upon a corpse. We all know what Lord Stannis is. A book of grievances bound in skin. This is an attempt by a barren man to seize power after my husband." She did not choke on the word, which pleased her. "Met with misadventure. If we are to count hair upon heads, then we must shave them all and see what lies within." The High Septon did not answer her directly. He turned instead to Barristan Selmy. "Lord Commander," he said, voice grave as a bell, "you served the King Robert from the day he took the throne. You have seen his children." Barristan's old blue eyes went sad as a man watching winter come. "I have seen the prince and princess and Prince Tommen," he said within his throat. "They are bright and brave and loved by the people. And what did King Robert tell you of lineage? That was too close to an argument." The High Septon abandoned it. Barristan's gaze slid briefly toward the boy in burgundy velvet. "The king told me stories of men he had loved and of boys he had fathered in streets and fields," he said. "I do not know what weight stories carry in a court of gods." "Then let the gods weigh," Cersei said near sweetly. She turned then, so smoothly that her gown made a sound like a sigh. "I will not be judged by shopkeepers and whores and traders. I demand my right." Even those who did not know what she meant felt the current shift. The Sept was a ship listing toward a reef, and every soul aboard leaned to counter. The High Septon's hands folded upon his belly. "Trial? By combat? The gods love strength," Cersei said. She looked at Sandor Clegane. "Prince Joffrey, command your shield to answer for your mother." Joffrey's face did not jump, not even a flicker. He had been schooled in not showing fear to sewers and to kings. He lifted his chin one notch further. "Hound," he said high and clear, "I command it. Slay her enemies and mine." Sandor, who had been leaning with one shoulder against a pillar, straightened with a sigh that might have belonged to a tired stable boy. He looked at the statues and then at the boy and then at the queen. There was a flick at the corner of his mouth that never grew into anything. He said at last. I'll fight for the queen. And who fights for the gods? Renly Baratheon said brightly, as if offering to bring wine. No man answered first. The quiet seemed like a dare. Ser Loras Tyrell stepped forward, all beauty and sudden heat under mail. If the gods will me, he said, and the ladies murmured, then I will be their sword. The gods will other things from you, the High Septon said with surprise and approval mingled. Duty do. Yes, not always answer to youth. His gaze shifted to Barristan. Lord Commander. The old knight did not flinch. He had the look of a man who has walked under falling snow for too long and forgotten warmth. He bowed his head just once. I will stand for the 7, he said. A sound ran through the great September that was not quite cheering. It was relief, and it tasted of wine after thirst. Cersei's lips went tight as a scar. The High Septon insisted the combat be fought beneath the steps, not upon the holy pavement. The crowd poured out through the enormous doors like dry peas from a split sack. The steps of Baelor ran wide as a harvest field, and the sun pressed its weight upon helms and scalps until men cursed the glare and the dust. The statues watched from within their great house, and the bells were still. Sandor Clegane rolled one shoulder and looked at the grind of his sword edge. Barristan Selmy discarded his cloak and the gilded flourishes that were ornament and took instead a round shield that had seen honest dents. There was the question of arms. There was ceremony. There was the thought that men wished to delay as long as possible that first startling clamor. At last it came. Sandor came like a dog one tires to beat back from the door. Direct, low, quick. Barristan's shield spoke first. A hollow thunder, parry and turn. Old rhythm set against younger strength. The hound's blade worried at the seams of the older man's stance. Seeking a gap like fire seeks a crack in a thatch roof. Barristan gave ground like a miser dropping coins at a toll. Each step was deliberate. Each breath measured and spent where it bought the most. The hound drove him to the space where the steps meet the square, and dust gathered in both men's hair as summer flies gather above a nail wound. Barristan's edge cut once along Sandor's thigh and drew blood like drawn ink. Sandor snarled and answered with a savage overhand that would have split a younger knight to the nose. Barristan took it upon his shield and let the force stagger him half a pace, then repaid with a low slice that sang along Sandor's greaves. The hound's boot slipped. He recovered with a strength that took the breath of those nearest. They fought for long minutes that were hours. The noise changed shape as it went back and forth across the stones. Men who had come to see piety made spectacle leaned forward with their mouths open. Women who had come to see justice murmured each time a blade missed a face by a hair. The queen watched with a queen's stillness. Joffrey bit the inside of his cheek until a pearl of blood showed at the edge of his lip. Barristan faded and flared, gave way and returned, his feet sure even where they had no right to be. Twice he seemed lost. Twice he came back with some crisp economy that made the eye grateful. Sandor fought like a storm, unsubtle, honest in its killing. The second time Barristan darted inside with a suddenness that belonged to a man 30 years younger. He struck Sandor's sword hand so hard the hound's blade spun. The hound snatched it again before it hit stone with a noise like a dropped pan, and in so doing, left himself open by an inch. An inch is a measure of a king. Barristan's sword took it. Steel touched flesh at the side of Sandor's neck. The point did not pierce deep. It kissed and pressed. The hound froze with his blade down, and a hush fell that could have swallowed a city. Barristan did not add the pressure that would have been necessary to carry steel through muscle and windpipe. Hound, Barristan said, breath rough. Yield. Sandor's eyes did not betray him, but for a heartbeat a sound like the crackle of flames lived behind them. He lifted his sword and let it fall to the stone. The clatter was all the people needed to hear, though every one of them had already seen. The roar rose and rolled like surf. Cersei's face did not move. He could have killed you, she said, not loud, not to Sandor but to the air. It would be remembered later that she had not flinched. The High Septon came forward with his staff held like a scepter. The gods have judged, he proclaimed. No oils will stain the brow of any man or boy until the queen has submitted to penance for falsehood or to further inquiry in private, as the most devout shall recommend. The kingdom shall endure. The city shall hold fast. Mother, have mercy upon those who doubt. Cersei climbed the steps with her boys and girl gathered, the king's guard a moving wall. The people called out to her as they always did, some slobbering, some spiteful, most merely hungry for a face. She did not look at them. The sun made her hair into a thing that would have been a golden halo upon a holier head. Inside the sept, the heat fell away to marble cool. Sansa followed because it had never occurred to her not to, and because some coil within her hoped against hope for kindness to fall on her like water. She kept her eyes from her father. Myrcella caught her hand like a child in a market and squeezed. In that moment, Sansa loved her forever and hated the world that made love useless. Later, there were meetings that were not called meetings. In the Red Keep, under ceilings painted with warriors and maidens in postures that no one took, men paced and spoke and swore. "You have shamed the crown." Pycelle was bold enough to wail, before his courage ran down the inside of his leg. "You must placate, your grace. A gift to the September." "A queen's high road is not paid for with loaves," Cersei said. "The old goat has taken from me the one thing I cannot take back by force. That will be remembered." "Force will still do," Littlefinger murmured. "If one tells the city that the High Septon presumes to unmake kings, and if a recipe of coin and wine is poured in the right ears, one can have 30,000 souls who will chant that he is a usurper in a cloth hat." 30,000, Cersei said. "How many will turn and run when the bells toll against them?" "There are ways to make bells fall silent," Janos Slynt offered, overconfident and sweating meat. "An accident in a tower. Men chat with ladies with knives. There's many an old Septon with a heart that could be made to." "No," Varys murmured, and his voice was so soft that they looked at him as men look at a faint music they cannot place. "If you strike him now, the city will believe the gods themselves were struck. Murder is a clumsy scribe. It writes where it is not wanted." Cersei's hands were pale upon the table. "He has made me walk barefoot in the street, without making me move an inch," she said. "What is left to take?" "Time," Varys said. "He has taken time from you. You must move in the time that is left." "Renly will move," Littlefinger added. "He looked today like a man who has found himself with more friends than he expected. He will not stay. He will gather his pretty banners and make for Highgarden or Storm's End, and someone will lift him upon a shield. He may not be wise, but he is pleasant, and pleasant men always find a bed. Stannis, on the other hand, will take Dragonstone's narrow rooms and dream up laws to throw at us like stones." "And Tywin," Cersei said. "Tywin will sharpen," Varys said. "He is a whetstone that believes itself a sword. He will come if only to object to the way you are cornered." Cersei rose, and her chair rasped the floor like a plaintive beggar. "Then we will not be cornered. I will go nowhere near the September without guards like a forest around me. I will not walk in white. I will not confess. I will not." She broke off not for lack of will, but because the words threatened to turn on themselves and say something truer than she allowed. "The coronation will go forward." "The oils," Pycelle began. "The oils are fat," Cersei said. "Swords are thin and go through bellies. The people will cheer when they are told to cheer. Joffrey is Robert's son because I say he is." Varys bowed his head. Peter's mouth made the shape of a laugh without letting it escape. That night, in a small cell where darkness had a smell like damp cloth, Ned Stark lay and counted the places his pain came from as a boy might count stars lying in summer grass. He had spoken in a holy place and some weight had eased, as if words had been stones in his pockets and he had taken some out and thrown them into a river. It did not make him lighter. It made him different. Varys came again, gliding in as if he were memory. "You have bought yourself a little time," the spider said not unkindly. "The queen will bide and gnash her teeth and believe that to be patience. It is not, and she will do something stupid soon. Stupidity is a tool." "Let me see my daughters," Ned said. "One is easily seen," Varys replied. "The other is a ghost that loves rats and crawl spaces. She has a namesday knife and a habit of wandering. She is alive, and I mean to keep her so. For that, you should be forbidden to be angry at me for 3 days." Ned wanted to laugh and found instead he had tears prickling. He was grateful the dark took them. "Tell Sansa to be brave. She has been asked to be many things she was not meant for. Today she was a statue upon a tide, and she did not fall. Be proud of her if you must be proud of something. And will he crown the boy without the oils?" Varys's silence was a thing with teeth. "A crown set crooked can be adjusted, Lord Stark. A head cannot." In the barracks, Sandor Clegane washed his hands under a trickle from a cracked jug and watched the water run red, then pink, then clear. The cut at his neck sang with each beat of his pulse. Barristan Selmy had spared him because of some old man's idea of honor. The thought didn't sit. He had yielded because he had no wish to die with Baelor the Blessed staring at his last twitch. He looked at his hand, at the thick rope of scars upon it, and saw in memory his brother's face in firelight. He drank wine from the bottle and let it sting. When the girl found him, little bird, eyes too wide and courage too soft, she stood at his door and did not quite enter. "You were brave," she said, like a child telling herself the night had only been a game. "I was lucky," he said. "Go. This is a den for dogs." She stood with her hands clasped, and he could not keep himself from snarling. She did not flinch, and that astonished him more than any sword point. "When they crown him," she said in a rush, Will you keep him from hurting my father?" "I keep him from falling on his arse in the yard and from cutting his finger on his own sword," Sandor said. "That's what my hands are for." "I know you. You hate knights," she said. "But you fought for the gods today." "I fought because the boy told me to," he corrected. "No one else gives a rat's arse why a man fights." She swallowed and nodded and fled at last. He drank again and did not watch the door. Renly Baratheon stood on the long gallery above the yard and watched the sun sink. His cloak green as grass made shadow. Ser Loras leaned beside him with his hair let loose for once, and it made a small halo the High Septon would not approve. "He will not be anointed," Loras said. "It prickles Renly, the way a shirt of hair does." "He will put a crown upon his head without oil," Renly replied. "Cersei will make the 7 bow by not bowing herself. It is a trick. It will work for a week, and then someone will stick a knife into the trick. And you will be there with the knife," Loras said. Renly laughed with a sound that was too pleasant to be called harsh. "No, I am beloved. I hold knives only thick with honey," he said. "We leave tonight. I have letters for every rose in the Reach. Mace Tyrell loves me as one loves a son who laughs at one's jokes. I will be lifted by boys who have never seen winter. And while they lift, my brother Stannis will stiffen and set his jaw and glare so hard at the sea it will freeze out of shame." Loras smiled then. "Ser Barristan should have finished the Hound. Ser Barristan should have taken holy orders," Renly said. "He has the look of a man who thinks there is one right shape for every act. He will not find that shape in the city any longer. A pity. I would have liked him at my side. It is said he is as swift as a tail." "Will you take the boy?" Loras asked, meaning Tommen perhaps, or meaning some other boy. It didn't matter. "No, I take only what walks beside me willingly," Renly said, and then they went to their separate, necessary betrayals. One to a stable to whisper to a groom, the other to a hall to whisper to a banner. Barristan Selmy knelt in his bare cell and watched the last rectangle of light withdraw from the floor as if it were a tide that had tired of breaking on this shore. He placed his sword across his knees and let one finger run the length of its nicked edge. He remembered Rhaegar Targaryen's harp more clearly than Rhaegar's face, and he remembered the look in Daenerys' brother's eyes when he had first seen the usurper's hall 30 years ago. He had served kings who laughed and kings who bled, and one who had done both so often that it had been all one and the same. He had stood for the gods because someone must, and there was no one else in that moment whose doing so would not have made the city worse. It had not been courage so much as arithmetic. He did not think the queen would forgive him for it, and he did not mind. The boy would have to choose what man he wanted for council soon, whether he were crowned with oil or spat in with sword. Barristan had an aching feeling that he had already chosen. On the morning chosen for a coronation that did not come, Cersei put the boy on the throne anyway. There were no oils and the High Septon's chair remained empty. A chair makes a strong statement when empty. Trumpets sounded because trumpets always can be made to sound. She placed a circlet upon Joffrey's hair and whispered a tiny speech into his ear. He repeated it with a voice that tucked every cruelty into velvet, so that one had to be very careful picking it up. The hall was full of people who had decided their faces the night before. Awe, joy, skepticism carefully smoothed, enthusiasm like kindling arranged neatly around a wet log. Outside, the bells took up their work again, and they did not ring for joy. They rang for a vigil. The city's faithful camped upon the steps and in the square and in the streets leading up to it, and they sang through the heat until the light broke into 100 pieces on all the little pools of sweat. They held candles that dripped on their wrists and did not complain. They watched the doors of the great house and waited for a queen to come barefoot. She did not come. They traded little loaves and blessed one another and told snatches of stories about just kings long dead. The gold cloaks watched from the shadows of arcade and alley. Jaeno Slint set men where he was told and then looked for his coin. He had a daughter with hair like straw, and he thought sometimes that she would be a lady. Littlefinger found him where the shade was cool and clapped him on the arm as if they had been born in the same village. "We will keep it peaceable," Peter said in that friendly brogue that came and went as it suited him. "Let them have their singing. Keep your men off the steps. Pull them back if anything starts that cannot be stopped with a gloved hand. Do you know how a crowd grows teeth?" "I know how a pig grows fat," Slint said, grinning. "It grows teeth when it is told it has them," Peter said, still smiling. "Do not tell it. Not yet." By evening, the vigil had turned into a fair without laughter. Men sold relics that had been dropped by saints only hours before. Women hawked strips of cloth that the mother had certainly not worn. A High Septon preached so well that even men who had come to mock wept by mistake. "You see," Varys told Cersei, hands open. "You see how the absence of a blessing becomes the shape of the whole day. You can fill a cup with wine or honey or blood. If you leave it empty long enough, people begin to taste what should be there and call it real." "I will not be made to walk," Cersei said. "I am not some freckled girl who bedded a squire behind a barn." "You will be made to kneel," Varys said gently, "if you do not find a way for the gods to stand." That night, the city burned a little here and there. A baker's shed went up because a lantern fell. A rope of poor fellows pulled down a statue of a warrior who might have been a Lannister if one had squinted, and the King's Guard rode and struck with the flats of their blades. Hunger crawled through alleys and found its old nests and lay down in them to sleep. In a house by the river, a woman named Chitaya kissed her child and made her sleep. Then she counted out coin and hid it and sat with her back to her door. Ned Stark slept and woke with the same dream. Snow falling through broken rafters, a woman's hair spread upon a pillow, a door that would not open. It was a memory disguised as a dream. It had kept him alive in the mountains, and it would not let him die here. He thought of his wife in the Riverlands and his son with a sword that would feel very heavy in young hands. He thought of Arya, 5 feet tall in his mind and covered in mud, grinning. At first light, a message came to the Red Keep. Lord Tywin Lannister was mustering men at Harrenhal and had sent ahead Ser Kevin with 100 hard riders and twice that in coin. He wrote that the Sept's presumption was an infection that must be cut away before it found the heart, and that if it were not cut, he would do it with hot iron when he came. He wrote that his daughter must hold the city as a mother holds a screaming babe, close enough to be safe, not so close as to choke it. He wrote that he would forgive nothing and forget less. Cersei read and smiled, for once honest. "Good," she said. "At last, there will be a man in this city." Varys said nothing. Littlefinger tapped his finger on the table for a long time until even he seemed to notice it, and then he stopped. The third day's vigil became a week's. The faithful grew tired, and their tiredness became smoke that got in everyone's eyes. The High Septon preached moderation, which is always more interesting than famine but less effective. He sent polite words to the Red Keep, and Cersei returned them with courtesies thin as paper. He sent word to Dragonstone and received none. He sent word to Storm's End, and the Raven went out over the sea and never came back. Renly was gone. The Green Cloak was seen no more. Loras Tyrell vanished as quietly as an oath broken in a dark room. Ser Barristan walked the yards and found that young squires still asked him to show them how to turn a man's blade with the lower edge of a shield, and he showed them, patient as rain. On the 7th day, the High Septon's voice failed him during the second homily, a thing that had never happened in his long life. He took it as a sign and slept in the mother's sanctuary with his head upon his arm like a tired child. In that sleep, a stranger with a face like a mirror leaned over him and said, "You have set a wheel that will not stop when you think it should." He woke with the taste of ash in his mouth. Sansa stood with Myrcella and watched men build a dais before the Red Keep's main door. She had learned that if she looked pious often enough, people would stop watching her face. She had become so good at it that she sometimes fooled herself. The Hound had looked at her once since the duel and had not spoken. It was almost worse than his words. "Will they go to the Sept again?" Myrcella asked, unwinding and rewinding a ribbon about her fingers. "They sing so sadly. I like when they sing about the maiden, not about fathers." "They will sing until they are hoarse," Sansa said. "And then they will whisper. And then they will only look. And then they will start again." "You sound like a septa," Myrcella said, surprised. Sansa had meant to say something kinder. The words had chosen themselves. "I wish I were one," she said, and a part of her meant it because septas were rarely beheaded. The city waited for someone to do something foolish. The city did not have to wait long. A sellsword in a borrowed cloak decided to push through the vigil with a cart selling rotten oranges and a knife hidden beneath them. He cut 2 men and a woman, and the men cut him, and the woman screamed, and people ran, and the king's men ran, and then someone slipped upon an orange and laughed like a hyena, and in that noise was all the noise of the city, gathered and thrown. It should have been nothing. It became something. The steps filled with boots, and the bells filled with the sound of hands upon ropes, and the air thickened with shouts. The Hound went up 3 steps and struck a man with the flat. The man struck him back, and it became a story. Cersei stood upon the rampart and watched, and her mouth went flat. "Send them in," she said to Jaino, who had been waiting to be told to do something that would make him necessary again. He sent them in. The king's men climbed the first steps and then the second. They broke the line like a man poking at a hive. The faithful broke and closed again, and it was like fighting a tide. For every man who fell back, another came forward, a little closer to the doors. A stone flew and cracked against the helmet of Ser Preston Greenfield. He staggered, then righted himself, furious and embarrassed in equal measure. "Stop," Ser Barristan said, voice like a drum. But he was on the other side of the steps, and the word did not travel. It reached 3 ears, and 2 of them ignored it. It would have become a slaughter of the poor by the paid, had not the doors of Baelor swung wide at once, and the High Septon himself come forth with a host of novices and sisters behind him, each holding a candle. The candles were too many for light. They were a sign, and the sign was that night lives everywhere, even at noon. He lifted his staff, and he did not thump it. He merely held it high. "Children," he said without raising his voice above the twin roars. Those nearest heard and strained to carry it further. "Children, you love your gods by not breaking each other upon their steps. Go and pray in your own houses. Go and feed a hungry mouth. The 7 are not deaf. They hear better when you do not shout." A woman began to sob, and then others, and the men, made suddenly ridiculous by their own weight, slunk back in knots. The gold cloaks were left with their weapons held limply and their mouths open. Jaino Slynt turned on his heel and sought someone to tell him why the day had gone wrong. Cersei laughed then, short and raw. "He can part seas," she said. "Perhaps he will bring back the dead next. Perhaps he will keep them from showing up too soon," Varys replied. "That is almost as precious." Word came that night that Tyrion Lannister had been freed from the Vale in some comical fashion. A sky cage and a mountain clansman and a sellsword with a tongue that might have been a knife. Cersei heard and poured wine and did not spill any. Send for my brother when he comes. She told no one in particular. At least one Lannister knows how to use a tongue. A raven from the Riverlands brought a different kind of news. Jaime Lannister had been seen crossing a ford with 40 men, running for a green world before a shadow could swallow him. He had left a trail of fury and had not looked back. Cersei took the note and touched it to her mouth as if it were a relic. When she slept, she dreamed that the stranger lifted his hood and it was Jaime's face and it carried no scars. Barristan Selmy went to the Sept the next morning and prayed with a soldier's economy. He did not ask for victory. He asked for clarity. When he rose, the High Septon was there, and his old face was soft as candle wax. You did a thing no man would have done for you, the High Septon said. You spared a man when you could have cut off a head and been celebrated. I have been celebrated, Barristan said dryly. It sticks in a man's throat. Beware, the High Septon said, of a queen's gratitude. It is a noose woven of silk. I do not have enough neck for all the nooses that have been fashioned for me, Barristan replied, and was startled to find that both men smiled. Sansa was told to dress in green the day the queen sent to the Sept a jar of perfumed oil and a prayer scroll, a small peace offering, small enough that it might be refused without offense and accepted without price. She watched herself in a glass and barely recognized the girl who had become someone upon whom things were used. When she went to the balcony to breathe air that did not smell of wax, she found Sandor there again, as if stone had once been poured over his boots and he had grown into it. You looked human, he said without preface. When? She asked, alarmed, then angry that she had been alarmed. When you looked at your father, he said. Most people look at their fathers like at a man who owes them a coin. You looked like someone had cut your throat and you were holding it shut with your hands. She flinched. He will not. They will not. They will not yet, Sandor said. The queen likes her pretty games. She's lost one and won another. She'll want to break a toy and mend it and break it again. They won't kill him until it pleases her to hear the noise that happens when a crowd does not know whether to cheer or wail. Sansa gripped the rail until the wood printed her skin. You are cruel. I don't waste sweetness, Sandor countered. He rubbed idly at the cut on his neck. Tell your father thanks for making me bow in front of all those sheep. He saved you, she said, sudden heat in her voice. You could have died. He shrugged, as if life and death were two mugs and one could drink from either without thinking. We all die. Some do it on steps. Some do it in feather beds. He eyed her. Some don't do it because they're too pretty to be allowed to. He left her then, and she wanted too much to call him back with something witty and cruel of her own. No words came. They had all been stolen by wiser mouths. By the time Tywin Lannister arrived outside the city in a rippling flood of banners and steel, the crisis had not ended, only changed shape. The vigil was a thing people spoke of with pride and impatience. The High Septon had grown thinner, which some took as a sermon. The crown sat steady on a boy's head without oil, and nobody quite knew how to feel about their own inability to tell whether that made it heavier or lighter. Tywin's first act, once the gates had clanged and the men had curved themselves to new streets, was to stand in the hall before his daughter and say nothing for a full count of 20. Men do not often count that high in silence unless they have learned that words frighten more when they are withheld. Cersei did not blink. You will heed the faith, he said finally. You will not make war in the streets against the bells. You will find the High Septon a compromise he can eat and pretend he likes. Then you will crown the boy with oils. In the meantime, you will bribe every hungry mouth within walking distance. The city is a gut. Fill it if you wish it not to turn on you. Pay the goldcloaks more. Pay the kettlemen in Flea Bottom. Pay the whores to smile and say the king is kind. Pay the bakers to sell half-loaves whole. A city is a ledger when you are sober enough to see it. Cersei listened to her father and thought, this is the first man who has touched my life today with something other than a soft glove. She wanted to be petulant. She decided not to. She hated deciding things that were wise. And if the High Septon refuses still? She asked. Then we will replace him with one that does not, Tywin said. The High Septon knew the shape of that answer before it was spoken. He had already begun to select those among the most devout who might be tempted to betray him for a ring, and he had learned the names of those who would not. It was a nasty and exhausting inventory, like counting lice. He had already chosen the penance he could accept without breaking his own back. A procession through the city with lighted candles and bare feet, but not nakedness. Public prayer to reassert the sanctity of a bed without naming a sin. A donation of wheat. A sermon where he would say that the gods had weighed and had found that sometimes the scales must be put away lest men mistake them for the gods themselves. He sent word that he would accept this compromise if it were offered. He did not send it to the queen. He sent it to the man who would understand exactly how to spend it. The letter went to Tywin Lannister's tent and came back in the hands of Ser Kevan, whose politeness was as clean as a priest's robe. The procession took place on a day when the sky looked like clean linen and the heat had finally loosened its grip. The High Septon walked with candles and bare feet and bled a little from the heel like any man who has walked too far on stone. The queen walked at a distance that satisfied the city and did not satisfy the hardest hearts. Joffrey stood upon the balcony and tried to look moved. Tommen looked moved without trying. Myrcella looked frightened. Sansa held herself the way one learns to hold one's breath when diving. Certain her lungs will explode and more certain that they must not. The oils were poured at last upon Joffrey's brow, and the scent of them was like the ghost of a garden. The High Septon's hand did not shake. The boy's hair received the oil as if it had been waiting for balm. The cheers climbed and fell again and climbed again upon themselves, a sound with no memory. In that moment, some of what had been torn in the city was mended with thread that could not be seen. Peter Baelish watched and tallied the invisible coins. When it was over, the faith had not been cowed, and the crown had not been humbled, and the realm had not been saved. It had been something else. Put off, persuaded, delayed, costed. That is what kingdoms are more often than not. Lord Eddard Stark did not die that day. His head did not befriend the summer flies. He lay in a cell and lived because the city could not decide which would be more expedient, his death or his usefulness. That indecision had 100 fathers, and the High Septon was one. Varys was another. Cersei was a third. Tywin, in his arrogance, believed himself the only one. Sansa dreamt every night that she stood upon the steps of Baelor and watched a sword go up and never come down. Renly, southward, gathered banners like a boy gathers seashells, and he smiled and wrote letters that smelled faintly of roses. Stannis, on Dragonstone, sharpened laws until they cut his own fingers and bled him into prayers to a god with no face the High Septon knew. In the Riverlands, wolves began their run and did not stop. In the east, a girl with dragons took a step into a fire and did not be burned. But that was another story the city had not yet earned. On a night when the wind shifted and came from the sea, bringing tar and salt and the sound of ropes like bowed strings, the High Septon climbed the great steps alone and stood beneath the rose window. He set his staff down and let his shoulders drop. He said nothing aloud. The statues heard, which is the same as saying nobody did. He thought about the day he would die. He thought of the queer comfort in knowing that even kings and queens and boys with crowns upon their brows and knights with blades that could write their names upon other men's blood, all of them would come one day to a stillness like his own. He had tried to save the city and had perhaps only saved a week. He did not despise the smallness of that. He thought of Barristan Selmy's blade held at a man's throat that could have been any man's, and of the inch between living and not. Perhaps that is where the gods live, he thought. In inches, in the spaces we do not fill with our shouting. He turned then, and in the dark of the nave, a shape moved. The stranger, he thought absurdly, and then laughed at himself with his breath. It was only Varys, who glided rather than walked. "We have kept war from the steppes," Varys said, sounding pleased in a tired way. "For a while. It will come," the High Septon said. "It will always come," Varys agreed. "But not today. You give me a day and I will give you another day. We will stitch them together like poor wives sew blankets from old cloth." He tilted his head. "You did well. I did not do evil," the High Septon said. "That is sometimes the bravest thing a man can manage." Varys bowed. "Then sleep, your holiness." We begin again in the morning. Above them, the tilted remains of sunlight had long since gone. The candles were out. The city breathed in dark like a beast in a cave, and for a while, no one dreamed of bells.